Hello, everyone. Welcome to a very special edition of In the Spotlight. I'm Mike Kenichi. I'm very excited tonight. We have three important people who have been a big part of Derby over the last several years. And one of them made a generous donation about 7 years ago to the Derby Sports Complex. The beautiful field that you see now in Derby is because of her generosity. And that, of course, is Joan Payden, whose father, JR, was a Derby graduate in 1915. And Joan, thank you for coming on today. I really appreciate it. We also have the superintendent of schools of Derby, Dr. Matt Conway, who's been superintendent, I would say, well over 10 years now. So, Dr. Conway, thank you for coming on as well.
Thanks for having me.
And then, you know, as far back as from the time he was born, he's been a part of Derby, and he's done a lot of things in Derby over the years, especially, with the Derby Electronic Valley site, which, is still running some 25 years now. And that, of course, is Jack Walsh. And Jack, thank you for coming on as well.
Always a pleasure, Mike.
So, Joan, I'm always fascinated about your father. And as a young kid, his father passed away. So he really didn't have a lot of mentoring when he was growing up, did he?
No, he really didn't. He was an only child, and his father was an engineer and went west alone and died rather young. And he always had great respect for his mother, but he wasn't close to her. And he was at Yale when the war broke out, and he didn't tell anyone. He didn't tell her. And he was a very brave man, but sometimes got very uptight at silly things.
And Joan, interestingly enough, I think about the Thanksgiving football game that's going on with Derby and Oxford next week. But for many years, it was Derby Shelton. And if I'm not mistaken, your father played in the first ever Derby Shelton Thanksgiving game, correct?
I'm not sure.
I believe so. I think he played in the first ever Derby Shelton football game. And that says a lot because that rivalry has been going on forever.
Well, my mother was born in Shelton and went to the Shelton High School, but they never knew each other. He went on to Yale, she went on to Columbia, and they didn't get together until after college. So that was sort of different.
That's
Right.
a valid thing, though, Joan. That happened a lot. My father was a Derby High graduate, and my mother was a Shelton High graduate. So it did happen a lot in the Valley.
Oh, yeah. And Joan, what I found interesting as well is your father and grandfather both spelled their name Paden, but it's now spelled Payden. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, that's sort of a funny story. I never know how truthful it was. My grandmother could be rather difficult, and she claimed that there was another family that spelled it sort of that way, and she put in the Y in because she said I kept getting their mail. So I'm not sure what the story was, but she liked to stir things up.
Joan, he had to be, you talked about he didn't really have a mentor growing up, wasn't very close with his mother, but that just shows the work ethic he had because he was a honor student throughout his life and he was valedictorian of the class of 1915, correct?
Yes.
Yeah,
And
and you have his speech somewhere, don't you?
yes, I do. I came out to California a number of years ago, but I'm still a Connecticut person.
Right. Yeah. And Dr. Conway, if I remember correctly, when Joan first called you, she wanted to talk about doing something for Derby Sports. You had never met her, correct? I mean, that was like the first conversation you had with her, and Derby at the time, I think, was really in need of a new sports complex. So it was almost like it was fate when she called you.
It really was, Mike. We had put together a proposal for the bond commission, and it actually received approval on it. Other than a big piece of it, which was the field house, had to be cut out of that project due to the kind of a cap on the amount of funding that the state had previously given any one project for a new turf field, and that was 2.9 million. Our original proposal for 5, and we had to cut it back to the 2.9. And literally within that same period of time, out of the blue, Joan had called the high school. The high school notified me. I took a trip downtown and to find out more about who I was calling back, other than that they had provided, she had provided the scholarship in her dad's name, and found the same information in terms of the spelling of the name, but wanted to make sure I had the correct individuals, but was able to find everything from his military information to marriage certificates and so forth. So it was kind of neat to do the research, and then where the actual boarding house that they lived in was then located, which was kind of neat, right down the street from my current office, in fact. But it was neat to find that information and make a connection with somebody who is just once in a lifetime meet, I think, type of individual that Joan is, and what she has done for JR. It's just still today, just kind of takes me off my feet. So.
Right. And Joan, before you had ever decided to do this, for years, you and your late brother, William, had done a scholarship to both Derby and Shelton schools, correct?
Yes. And he was a college professor and a journalist and a very bright guy, and very sports-minded. And he died young with a melanoma, and still miss him today.
Mm.
Right. Yeah, he seemed like a great guy. Now, Jack, I got to believe that, being the Derby historian that you are, you knew a lot about J.R. Payden way before you had ever met Joan. Am I correct on that?
Well, I started to learn when Matt called me and asked me if I knew the name, and I didn't know the name, so I started researching just as he did. And actually, the first story I found was a story about Trinity College, and I was thinking it was Trinity College here in Connecticut, but it was Trinity College in Washington, D.C., and it was a story about Joan, and she had donated money for some kind of a student center, I believe. But what caught my attention immediately was that in the story it said, and it all began in Derby, and that really got my attention. And then I started going to the library myself and finding the old stories, and it's an incredible story. I can't tell you how often I tell that story. I mean, I just think the whole thing is unbelievable, just incredible. But it's a tribute to Derby too.
Yeah.
John would tell you that. First of all, he was a remarkable guy. The only way to describe it, he was a remarkable guy, but something inside him tied him to Derby. He had great memories, and keep in mind that Derby in 1910, 1915 was quite a bit different than it is today. In some ways, it was a lot better off back then than it is today, especially economically, and have been a pioneer in so many things. But boy, it's just an incredible story. It's got to be kept alive.
Yeah, definitely. And Joan, he started out at Yale for a couple of years, and then he had to go in the service. So he finished Yale after he got out of the service. So I mean, it's just remarkable.
Well, I didn't mean to interrupt you. It was a little story about going into the service, because he always wanted to fly, and we did not have an Air Force. It was a Signal Corps, and that was sort of unusual. And he went to I think it was MIT took 7 or 8 men and gave them training, and they sent them off to either France or UK, and they sent him to the UK, and that's how it all developed.
Right. Dr. Conway, I mean, for a guy who didn't grow up in Derby, I mean, just to be around all this the last several years and working so closely with Joan, trying to get this uh, facility off the ground and stuff like that. I mean, really, you probably learned so much about the history of Derby just being around Derby people. Like, you know, obviously Joan's father was a Derby graduate. Being around Jack, I'm sure there's people in the Derby community you've talked to. So, I mean, there's got to be a part of you that feels like you've been in Derby your whole life, even though you didn't grow up in the town.
You it gives me goosebumps just hearing you say that, Mike, because it is so true. And people in my life outside of Derby know it to be just how you just described it. That and through this project, though, there was multiple times throughout every day that I learned even more as a result of working with Joan, with Jack, and on this project. It accelerated my history on Derby as a result of digging deep to find out more about this unbelievable individual, JR, and of course, Joan, and trying to be able to provide that information back as well, but become someone who was at least felt comfortable and confident speaking on the history.
And what I find interesting too is, when it, was decided, I think early 2017 that this was going to happen. And a lot of times you feel like it took so long, but it really didn't, because this whole facility was done by 2019. So you're talking about a 2-year project, which it seems long because when you're waiting for something, it seems like it takes forever, but it really didn't take long at all. I mean, once like they knew what they were going to do and got the donation, it really took off quick. And by the fall of 2019, I mean, I'll even go, didn't the graduates walk on the new field in 2019, the spring of 2019, if I remember correctly?
On the baseball field side, yes.
Yeah. So I mean, this thing really got done quick. And I mean, let me ask you, Dr. Conway, I'll start with you, because being the superintendent of Derby schools and wanting to see this project happen, what was that first home football game like, seeing the amount of people that were there that night and just seeing that this thing was done? I mean, you must still get chills when you think about it today.
I have them right now. Again, just hearing you ask that question, but and visually going back to that time, and you still do get chills. It was just to know what someone reached out and did in honor of their father for this community that had a great need at the time, was already on a path, but not near to this gravity of a new sports complex. And just the pride, I guess, alone that you were able to be a part of something so special. It's a once in a lifetime journey that continues today, and just feel so blessed to have been fortunate enough to be there when Joan called. I can't. It's changed my life.
And you look at all the things that everything that benefited these kids. For years, Derby track didn't have home track meets because the track wasn't really suitable for home track meets. And now you could have those. You have a beautiful track, then you have a beautiful football field, a beautiful baseball and softball field. I mean, so many of these young kids, I mean, they benefited so much from somebody taking the time to give back to her father's, hometown where he played sports and stuff. And I mean, it's just such a beautiful thing that Joan did. It really is.
Yeah. Yeah, it was, I think 92 was the last time Derby had a home track meet until Joan's gift and tribute to her father. And now they have actually a track on their own to run on. It's pretty
Yeah.
amazing.
And Joan, you got to be so proud. And I think like what makes you the most proud is the fact that, you know, if your father were here to see this, he would have like a smile on his face because it means a lot to him that the town he grew up in, where he played sports, where he got his education. I mean, he would just be beaming with pride to see that his daughter did something for the school that he attended. I mean, how do you feel about that?
Well, you know, it was a little different than you described it. Um, every day, something new happened, and I knew they were doing something there, and that I would like to maybe put $1 million or $1.5 million. I'm not a millionaire. Uh, I don't have a pile of gold in the corner. I could tell you about that in a minute. But I think there was a sinkhole in the football field.
Yep.
And they said, that's how it started. And they said, can you help out? Well, that one thing went from another. And about every 10 days, something happened that they needed money. And I remember very fondly about dirt. You know, there's good dirt and bad dirt. And when they were doing the basket, not the, I don't know which field. Baseball. And they found that there's an awful lot of dirty soil. We had to move it 70 miles to get rid of it. I mean, I learned more than, but in retrospect, it was wonderful. But at one point in time, I thought I was going to go broke. And I remember the very end of it, the right up on the hill there, where it was the press box. It was about ready to fall apart, and we had to get a helicopter or something and drag it up. It was something that I'll never forget the experience and the joy at the end.
You know, Jack, you've gotten to witness a lot of great Derby moments and you know, great Valley moments in general. And I could think about when the Valley they won that you know, all that, yeah, in 2000, and you got to be a part of that, and you got to see that, witnessing stuff like that, and then seeing this project happen. I mean, just being a guy that's been a lifelong Derby resident, what was it like for you to see this new facility? And just you're in that facility a lot too, Jack. You do a lot with the memorabilia and tours and things like that. So, what has it been like for you as a lifelong Derby resident to see something like this happen?
Well, you know, Mike, it was extra special because, you know, long before Dr. Conway was here, I was chairman of Parks and Rec. And one of the first things we did was to do a study of what our needs were in the city. Basically, all of our fields were substandard. And we put together a plan, a long range plan. And unfortunately, you know, the schools had issues at the same time. And both projects went out to referendum at the same time. Our original project for Parks and Rec was like $7 million, and I forget what the building was. And in all honesty, the residents said it's too much money. We can't do it. So both of the items, all the recreation and the school, went down to defeat. But you know, at that point, I said, "Well, look, the plan is still there. It documents our needs. You just have to take it a day at a time, and hopefully one day we'll get the things that we need." And you know, then when Matt came along, he went to the state and he got the money. And I can tell you, the field house, when I was chairman of Parks and Rec, it was a disgrace. Okay.
Yeah.
If we had the money, we would have torn it down and replaced it right then and there. I mean, there were times where the opposing teams wouldn't want to go in there at halftime.
Yeah.
The way it was done. So to finally see it happen was special. And, there was also a very special moment at that first football game. Doc, you'll remember.
Mm.
To incorporate history, and I don't know who came up with the idea. They wanted to identify the oldest living Derby high school football player. And somebody called me and said, "Do you know?" I don't know, but, with Facebook, I'm sure we'll find out. And we did. We found out who the oldest living football player was and also who the oldest living cheerleader was. And a very special moment at that first game, we had identified Foggy Nero was the guy's name, and he graduated during World War II, and he never finished his senior year. Okay, he didn't graduate because he went off to fight in the war. And the state legislature in the interim, a few years before this project, had said, well, if you had anybody who dropped out of school to go fight in the war, the city can give them their diploma. So, when you add all the hoopla about this incredible facility we had, we also had this great human interest story that this guy had played on the old field and graduated. Well, no, he didn't graduate. And thanks to Doc, he got his diploma that first night. So it was really a special night. We have the finest athletic facility in the state of Connecticut. It's the only way to describe it. There is no finer athletic complex in the state of Connecticut. But, we're keeping the history alive. It's very special. Very special.
And I think that's the important thing, is that the tradition has been kept alive. And, these young kids that don't really know a lot about the history, they get to learn things if they go into that building. They get to see that Derby has always been a very prideful town. And the people in Derby right now continue to work at keeping those traditions alive. And things like this are just proof of that.
Well, it puts the city not on an equal footing, but ahead of so many other communities. Look, the last 40 years have been difficult years, with the economy and to transition from the old industrial to what we have now, and then to emerge with this facility, and the whole area around it is just so special. There's nothing nicer in the state of Connecticut. I don't care if you go to the wealthiest communities. You're just not going to find anything better than what we have right here. So you want to build pride in a community, there it is.
And Dr. Conway, you must, anytime you drive by that field, no matter how many times you do, you must smile, or you must get proud just by looking at what is there, because like anything else, when you're superintendent or whether you're principal or you're teaching, you want, something to kind of have that you could say, what, this happened when I was there. And it's got to be a great feeling for you every time you drive by there, or even, walk down to a meeting or things like that.
It is, Mike, but I'm just thankful and feel blessed that, timing is everything. And that Joan came into our lives the way she did at the time that she did, so that facility is what it is today and gives many people that feeling. And you just think of the story that Jack just told about Foggy Nero. That never would have happened. He never probably would have had the opportunity to receive his diploma and his family with him when he did, if it wasn't for this field, because we wouldn't have been looking at the time for the oldest living player or cheerleader, where we would have then found him. And the 10-221A of our Connecticut General Statutes allowing us to do what we were able to do and honor him for his service in the war, while we're honoring JR for his lifetime of accomplishments, to include war.
and a veteran of an earlier war, so there's a connection there too.
Right. And Miss Payden, I find it remarkable as well that you were a newspaper reporter for many years, a journalism professor, public relations specialist. So I mean, you did it. You had a lot when you're doing newspaper reporting and stuff. You are covering a lot of current events and also history. So I think that also
Excuse me, are you talking about me or my brother?
you. Yep.
No,
Um,
You know, mixed
and
up.
you also were into secondary education, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
no, I was in the finance field.
Right. Okay.
No, Bill did all those things.
Yeah.
No,
Talk about Bill being a newspaper reporter because he also did a lot of things. Obviously you both were raised by great parents. So I mean, talk about that a little bit.
our parents always listened to us, and I always felt so blessed. Some friends of mine, they couldn't bring up subjects and that type of thing. They always listened to us and as adults. But I'd like to add something here, Mike, if you don't mind.
Sure.
This whole thing is the most exciting thing I've ever done in my life, and it wasn't planned. I knew as I helped out a little bit with the football field, but about every 2 weeks, they needed a couple $1 million. And I had a good job, but I had to be very, I had to do a lot of things that I didn't think I would do. I put up a lot of my net worth. But it was the most exciting thing I've ever done. And particularly when the last building was finished.
And I also think, Miss Payden, not to interrupt you, but I also think that knowing that your father loved Derby, he loved the town, and he was a graduate, that, in a lot of ways, you keep his memory alive, and you got to be a part of Derby for what you've done with this. And I mean, I think about the young kids, like I mentioned it before, and these kids who are going to school right now and kids who graduated a few years ago. They got to have just an unbelievable athletic facility that they'll remember forever, because I mean, when you walk into it, I mean, you almost feel like you're walking into something special. It really is just a beautiful place.
Well, it will be in my life forever. And here I sit in California. I miss New England.
Except for
Right.
snow.
Right. So, Dr. Conway, I figured I would have you kind of talk about this a little bit. There was a book that was recently, published not too long ago. It's like the history of Derby. Talk about that a little bit, because I know you have the book with you, and just talk about that book. And it's a great book as well, and it definitely tells a lot about J.R. Payden in that book.
Are you asking me or Mike?
Dr. Conway. Yeah, I was going to have him talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, it's an amazing book. Gentleman by the name of Jim Williams, a friend of Joan's, actually came to Derby and visited and spent some time with us up at the field house, and took some pictures, did a lot of research, and went back and wrote this book. And it really is a neat, gives somebody a great perspective in history of Derby, at the same time honoring JR and his accomplishments throughout his life, that all started, as Joan always says, it started in Derby. So it's an amazing capture of Derby's history, but also of JR's accomplishments, contributions while he was here, and certainly in his honor, what Joan has built. And it gives a lot of the information of as the project was being built as well.
Right. And I mean, how long has the book been out, Dr. Conway? Hasn't been it's probably been like a few months maybe.
Yeah, I'm just seeing if there's an actual exact date here on it, but yeah, approximately that, Mike. Yep.
Yeah. So I mean, it's really cool, and I would encourage people to read it, because when you're reading this stuff, you learn about Joan's father, but you just learn so much about the history of Derby as well.
Yeah.
And it's really just a great book. And Joan, I talk about your family just being a hardworking family, doing so many great things. And then there's another book that I really enjoyed reading, and you can see it right there. It's the William Payden Sports Memorabilia book. And God, this was just, I'm so glad Jack let me borrow this, because I didn't want to put it down. Talk about that a little bit, Joan.
Well, I met somebody that was a writer, and he looked at me and he said, well, if you ever need anyone to do some research and so forth. And I like to do things. I get itchy if I don't do something. And I can get more copies of that book if you want to sell it or whatever.
Yeah. I think a lot of people would love to read it. I told you I couldn't put it down. It was so much fun to look at.
Well, it's knowing somebody that's a good writer. This Jim Gibbons, I didn't really know him that well, but I started to read some of the things he had produced, and you have to dig around, and it's amazing what you find out.
Yeah, it really is. So let me ask you, Miss Payden. I mean,
Joan,
for someone who, like you said, lives in California, I feel like Derby is with you every day, though. I really do. Not just New England. I feel like the town of Derby, like you said, this is the proudest thing you've ever done. So, I mean, how impactful has Derby been for you?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last.
How impactful has the town of Derby, been for you?
It was seeing something. My academic background was math and physics. And in New York City, I got laid off for my first job. So I learned life early. And the thing with Derby, it was the best thing that I ever did. It was the largest project that I've ever gotten into. And I didn't know I was getting into it. But it was such fun doing it.
Right.
And I sort of, that's me. And 40 years ago, just to give you a little idea of what I did, 40 years ago, I had a good job, but I decided that they were going to sell the company. And it was a financial company. And I took my 401k money and liquidated it, and left the job and started the firm I have today, which is it's grown very successfully. But it's passion and commitment, those wonderful words. And I've met more people with passion and commitment. Mike and Jack, you had it in spades. You got me to do these things.
Yeah.
Not to admit, I was just in awe.
Yeah. And Jack and Dr. Conway, I think what the other thing that was great about this is you got to know Joan as a person, not just as J.R. Payden's daughter. And she became somebody that's been like a friend of yours for the last several years, because when you're working so closely with somebody like this and you're talking to her about the history of Derby, her father, and stuff like that, you do become friends with a person like that. So I think that's the other invaluable thing about all of this is you both, made a great friend as well.
Very true. Very, very, very true.
I
Sure.
you, Mike, pick up the phone and call each other, and I've sent a number of people over to Derby.
Yep.
Yeah. And I mean, again, I know like I sound like a broken record, but just these young kids, because I could see like how enjoyable these, especially the kids that run track and stuff, they have that great track, they could run on and things like that. And that's really what it's all about, because you want the best for the students and the student athletes at that school. You want them to have like a great school that they go to, a great athletic facility. And your generous donation provided so many great memories, moments, and, things that they'll take with them forever by this facility. And that in itself has to be the most rewarding thing for you.
Well, if you visit me in California and come up to my office, I have a desk. It's a fairly large office, and there's a helmet. The Derby helmet is on the table, and on the other side of the room is the California, Connecticut newspaper talking about it. It's got more Derby things than it has any other thing.
And
if I could share, Mike, too, there's an emotional piece for me in my office here in Connecticut with the connection to Joan in LA every day. But Joan's desk in my office and the credenza behind me was Joan's desk and credenza for 30 years.
Wow.
In her first 30 years at Payden and Rigel. And it wasn't until she was moving up 10 or 20 floors in the Wells Fargo building, Joan, that she replaced that set. And I was fortunate. And she reached out to see what Derby would like of the furniture that wasn't going to be going up 20 floors. And her desk was one of them. And I feel blessed every day to be able to sit at that same desk that she spent 30 years sitting at.
Oh, my. I had forgotten that. Well, let me tell you, there are other things in my office, the helmet and the newspaper articles, and people know Derby by the time they visit me.
It's amazing when you do go out there, Mike, you walk through the company and everybody there, every person there knew and knows about Derby. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it really is. And Jack, let me ask you this, because you've been around enough Thanksgiving games and have so many memories, but Derby will be home this year against Oxford, and there's always a breakfast that goes on before the game. So how much fun is it going to be that week of Thanksgiving, knowing that Derby is going to be home, and now they're trying to build a nice rivalry with Oxford, but for somebody that's been around the Thanksgiving contest forever, how special is it that it'll be at the Payden facility this year?
I think it's very special. Thanksgiving game is different than the rest of the schedule. The Ansonia game is a different kind of rivalry than Shelton. Derby Shelton was a fierce rivalry, but it was also a friendly rivalry. And now I think they can build that with Oxford. There is the breakfast that morning, and the museum will be open for people that day. So hopefully we'll get some people in there to see that. But it's just, the two towns, and now Oxford. And remember, Oxford was part of Derby. Okay, so it is a bit of a homecoming as well. But it is special. The two towns, three towns, the whole valley. I mean, I always tell people, look, if you're from the valley, you have two identities. You have the identity of the city, but you're also part of the valley, and the football has been a big part of that tradition. But I'm just thrilled that we're going to get more people into the museum
Yeah.
nowadays. So it's because when they get in there, they're blown away by what a first class facility that is too. It's amazing.
Right.
The red.
Oh,
I want to show you something. I
Okay.
forgot.
Sure.
There it is.
That's,
There you go.
That sits at the end of my desk.
Perfect. Perfect.
love it.
Had to show it to you.
So beautiful helmet. It really is. So Dr. Conway, let me ask you, with the Derby High School, the Pride of Derby, Connecticut book, will some of those books be on display at the Payden facility on Thanksgiving?
Yes, they will. We'll have them for sale at the breakfast as well as from the snack bar during the game. They'll be on sale.
Right. I just think having all three of you on today, it was very important because you've all had, an impact in Derby, and what's going on right now with, the sports facility and everything that goes into it. I mean, it's really great to be there. And the thing of it is that, Jack kind of alluded to it a few seconds ago, that the people of Oxford, when they go there that day, they're going to get to kind of look at this facility. They're going to get to check it out. And that's what's cool about the whole thing is whenever the opposing teams come to that facility, whether it's track, whether it's cross country, football, baseball, softball, whatever it is, they get to kind of see how beautiful this is. And they get to, look at the memorabilia and things like that. And that's really what's awesome about it is it's not just a facility just for Derby kids. It's a facility that anybody can go take a look at any time and really, be in awe of it because it just is a remarkable place.
And it's part of a turnaround for the entire city. For a long time, progress in Derby was demolition, tearing down things along Main Street. Well, this is a different kind of progress. This is things going up that are inspiring people. It's it goes way beyond sports here, way beyond sports.
Right. And Dr. Conway, like I said, you've been the superintendent for a long time now, but you've really gotten to embrace the Derby tradition. Not just Jack made a good point, not just sports, the town in general, but again, I mean, for somebody who didn't grow up in Derby, I would have to bet with everything that you've accomplished over these last several years, your heart is very much Derby first. Am I right?
100% correct, Mike. Yeah.
Yeah. And Joan, looking back on everything, I mean, again, your father was a Derby graduate. You've gotten to really taken a love into the town of Derby and be a part of it and meet so many great people. I know it's your proudest moment, but I would also have to, I'm just guessing, but I would have to guess that, you feel like you've been in Derby your whole life because of what you've been able to do these last several years.
Well, let me tell you, it's and I'm not just saying this, but it was the ability to do something that my family started, my grandmother and mother, and besides that, I'm an Easterner. I'm a New Englander.
Well, I really appreciate the three of you giving me some time today. It was really an honor to have all three of you together. And Joan, I met you a couple times at the Hall of Fame banquet and, the groundbreaking, but didn't really get to talk to you much. So it was really a pleasure to be able to finally talk to you today. And thank you for what you did for this town and for these students, because I mean, like I said, this is something they'll carry with them forever. And thank you for everything you did for Derby.
Well, you did an awful lot for me. My two friends there, Jack and Matt, and anytime you're out in California and Los Angeles, I mean that.
You've said that more than once, so yeah, I know you mean it.
Yeah. Well, Jack and Dr. Conway, as always, thank you for your cooperation and always, being helpful to me and for coming on today. And again, I really do thank the three of you, and let's win on Thanksgiving. I think that would be great.
Yeah.
It's been a long time.
Mike, I'm going to predict the Derby win, and it'll be the first Thanksgiving win in the city of Derby in 23 years.
Yeah. So
Who are they playing?
Oxford.
Yeah.
Isn't your niece from Oxford?
She was. So
Oh,
Meg used to live in Oxford, and now she's in Newtown. But yes.
Okay.
So where Meg used to live, Joan. Yeah.
Oh,
But it was part of Derby, Joan. Oxford was part of Derby.
Yeah. And, I think this is a great new rivalry. I think it's going to be, what is this, the third year they're going to play each other now?
Yes. Yep.
Yes. So it's still the rivalry is still very new, but I think again, Oxford's won the last two. If Derby were to win on Thanksgiving, now it becomes a little more of a rivalry because now it's not one-sided, and I think it would be great. And I agree with Jack. I think Derby will win on Thanksgiving. And you know what? 2002 was the last time that Derby people got to have nice turkey. So hopefully in 2024 that happens again. So wish them the best of luck. But thank you three again for giving me some time. I really do appreciate it.
Thanks,
Thank
Mike.
you, Mike, and thank you for everything you do, Mike, for Derby. It's unbelievable. I was telling Joan, you started the Athletic Hall of Fame, and she was at the dinner back in 2018, I believe.
17. Yep.
And it was pretty incredible. It's always every single year an incredible event, but it brings people together is what it does. Much like this complex, it brings people together. So it's pretty neat.
Yeah, really.
First international visitors yesterday. The mayor and the delegation from Pugliano, Italy were here, and
That's right.
that afternoon they got the tour of the facility in the museum. So
That's right.
that's our first international event.
Yeah, and I heard that was a great event. A good friend of mine went. She told me it was really fun to watch. So just a lot of great things happening in Derby right now. And that's really like why the month of November especially is such a fun time in Derby, because so much seems to happen, and hopefully the month of November ends with a great Derby win. That would be really cool.
well, the people I've met there, Jack and Matt, very, very special. And now, Mike, you don't know it. I feel isolated sometimes out here. California, strange state.
Well, Joan, just remember this. You may be in California, but there's people in the town of Derby that consider you a Derbyite, and
Good.
thank you. That'll always be the case. So you may be in California, but we know that Joan Payden is really in Derby. So thank you again, and thank you for all three of you for giving me some time today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. So that
Okay.
was Jack Walsh, Matt Conway, and Joan Payden. I'm Mike Kenichi for In the Spotlight saying good night, everyone.